The body is just not there for comparison or correction or consumption on the part of other people. It's not there for the approval or disapproval of someone catcalling or fat shaming on the street. Your body is for you.
Hey, hey, who's missing listeners? You have spoken, or is it you've listened? In any case, we're celebrating our most downloaded episodes this month, and we're starting this part right with author and philosopher Kate Manne. Her latest book dropped in January of this year, and it's called Unshrinking. In this episode, we get into all the misguided comments that link beauty or competence with body size. And above all, Kate is forcefully reclaiming the word fat. It's our listener fave from season 4 of Who's Missing. Here's Kate Manne with Your Body is for You. So I was just on your Instagram and I was taking a look at your house and sort of like zooming in. I did, Kate. I'm sorry. Zooming in on your artwork.
No, it's great. I do it all the time.
How would you describe your style?
Definitely whimsical. I like whimsical animals. Like, I'm very into cute art because so much of what I do is really grim that I love my house to look kind of cute and fun and whimsical and not too serious. Like, this is a more serious mask room, the study, but a lot of it, yeah, is like lighthearted etchings and social philosophy meets liking cute animals vibe.
Does that translate into what kind of media or like entertainment experiences you like to have? Do you like to,
Well,
or no? Are you dark and
no,
deep?
it does. It depends. I mean, if there was enough really good quality lighthearted television, then that's all I would watch is lighthearted,
Yes.
but it's hard to find. And so we've been watching, say, True Detective, so I will go for the, darker stuff if it's worth it.
What about stand-up comedy or like sketch comedy or comedy in general?
Unless it's by Hannah Gadsby, I'm not.
No! Shout out to the
She's
homeland.
so wonderful. Yeah, they are an amazing sign of all that Australia has to offer in terms of feminist, queer, autistic talent. So, yeah.
Great shout out. So I was talking to a client before I came on, and I noticed my palms were a little sweaty. I'm just very excited to meet you.
Oh,
I don't get sweaty palms very often, but it tells me that it means a lot to me. And I'll tell you, I might cry. We'll see. But I was telling this client, she's the head of recruitment and development at a very, very large company. And I said, I'm going to talk to this person. And she said, "What's the name of the book?" "Unshrinking." And she takes a pen and she's like, "Huh." And then I said, "Look, I've seen Kate on a number of things, and the book tour continues, and I kind of just want to talk to her as one fat girl to another."
yeah, totally.
And I had the experience. The other woman started to kind of get emotional too, and she was like, "Wow." At first, and I appreciate that you're reclaiming the word fat, just as you are,
Yeah.
the queer community has reclaimed queer. Um, but just from one like mid-40s woman in the Midwest reading, I had to kind of stop reading it after a little bit and just sort of take my time with it because it's a lot to confront, to hear your story and then to also have so much trauma because of what we look like. So, hi, I'm so happy to be with you.
It's so wonderful to be with you, and thank you for sharing that. It means a lot to me, and I'm just, feeling all the solidarity. really, and glad to be in community.
So, can you tell us what it was like for you to be a fat girl?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't especially self-conscious until I began to attend an all-boys school in my penultimate year of high school,
Uh-huh.
and that was a trip,
I bet.
as you can probably imagine. I mean, it's not that I felt great about my body before then, but my family was supportive and I was more focused on other things, and it wasn't
Mhm.
top of mind, I would say, that I was a fat girl. The teasing always really bothered me, but I was able to put it behind me when it happened. But then when I entered this school environment that was so male dominated and where the form that misogyny took was weaponized fat phobia against my body. And I was a chubby teen. I wasn't very fat. I can only imagine how
Mhm.
bad things would be for someone who is very fat in that environment. But it was still enough to make me the object of scorn and derision and just outright derogation. I had fat bitch scrawled on my locker, which was
Mhm.
also doused with fish oil to indicate how disgusting I was. I was at the local high school leavers assembly where you get those prizes, the superlatives, person most likely to blah, blah, blah. I was voted the person most likely to have to pay for sex
Mm.
for the rest of my life. And it felt so shaming and it was so scarring. And ever since then, I have really harbored a lot of body shame. And I then became a genuinely fat adult who
Mhm.
had to navigate this. And I should say, I identify now as a small fat person. I've been much larger in my life. And yeah, it really haunted me, this sense that my body was wrong,
Mm.
that it made me someone who was fundamentally either undesirable or maybe even more than that, maybe fuckable but unlovable.
Mhm. Yeah, I relate to I just had therapy today. And I also wanna be clear, like, my tears are not, like, grief over being fat. It is true feeling seen. It is that experience of, like, my experience is one of many people, and not just people at the bowels of society, which is where we put fat people. But fat people are everywhere,
Of
and
course.
right? And I think there might even be listeners who are like, "Fat phobia? What? Is this an ism?" Like, wait,
Mm,
racism,
mhm.
misogyny, I get those things, we're talking about those, but what has been the reaction just to naming fat phobia as a thing? Does it feel new to you?
There's a lot of hostility to it, I think you're exactly right, and it's not for lack of fat people. As you said, we're everywhere. I mean, it's upwards of 70% of us, based on CDC statistics, have some claim
Mhm,
to be fat,
mhm.
given our BMI, which we can get into how
Right.
horrific the BMI is and how misleading and so on. But yeah, about 70% of Americans are overweight or obese, according to the notoriously problematic BMI charts. And yet our ubiquity hasn't really tempered the hostility that we face.
Mhm,
And I think a lot of that is because there is this sense that it is not an important form of prejudice, that it's just a reflection of the obvious fact that we're unhealthy and doomed to die of fatness and can and should lose weight, which I think both of these parts of the argument have to be broken down and disputed, because weight is just not as malleable as people believe.
mhm,
Lots and lots of people, maybe most, can lose a modest amount of weight in the short term through diet and exercise, but the weight comes back really inexorably for the vast majority of people.
mhm,
And between one third and two thirds of people who go on a diet and lose weight will regain more weight than they lost within a 5-year period. So when you look at the statistics and you look at the fact that for the vast majority of people, upwards of 90%, maybe more like 95, 98%, they're not ending up lighter than they started. and probably a majority is ending up heavier than they started, it no longer looks like weight loss is feasible or practicable for the majority of people in the way that we've been told to, at least via diet and exercise.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, part of it is this myth that people can minutely control their weight, which is really not true. There's also, I think, this really shame-faced attitude that so many of us internalize when we are larger. And for listeners who are wondering, I use the terms fat completely neutrally and non-pejoratively, and I use it interchangeably with someone who lives in a larger body or is a bigger person.
Mhm.
All of these being just, for me now, neutral ways of referring to ways of living in the world and having a body, which are perfectly valid and great ways to have a body in my view, in my book. But yeah, there is this sense that because we're so mired in shame, we don't necessarily have that political solidarity, that coalition forming between and among people who are larger. It's rather this sense of like isolation and shame and trying to change ourselves and waiting for the thin individual within to emerge victorious after the next diet or exercise program. And so we're not necessarily thinking, look, I am just a larger person and I need to be in solidarity with people who are my size and larger who
Mhm.
probably have things even worse in the fat phobic world we occupy. And that's the kind of step that I wanted to explore taking in this book in the tradition of fat activism.
Mm.
So I cut my teeth very early on the internet with the fat activism of the early 2000s, and it was so liberating and so empowering. And so I really see myself as part of the tradition that has been spearheaded by people like Kate Harding and Marianne Kirby and Leslie Kinzel. And yeah, that tradition is so rich and so important, but it hasn't necessarily gotten all the political momentum it deserves
Mhm.
because of that shame and isolation that many of us are living through and with, thinking that our bodies are the problem and our bodies are the ones that are wrong, not the fact that we're wronged bodies, not
Yeah.
bodies that are just wrong and in need of fixing.
We are feeling beings. We feel first, God willing, we have a thought after that, and then we act.
Yeah.
I mean, ideally, right? And I think this feeling of shame that I carried with me so long in my life, Kate, I was just waiting for someone like all of us to say, "Here's what you do to get rid of that shame,"
Yeah.
right? Because it's so heavy and it's so secretive. And I too, like you, have lived in different bodies. Did you know bodies are supposed to change? Did you know that? So for the listener who's like, "Oh, the aches and pains," I'm like, "Yeah, like."
Yeah.
And I think, like, that shame had me thinking that I had to be thin and then my life could begin.
Yeah.
And I just wanna speak to, what you're talking about right now, fat activism, saying the word fat. I thought if I followed a step-by-step solution that I would get the promises, I would be happy. And I wanted to kill myself, and I tried to. So I have the data, Kate, that says being thin ain't the ticket. And now I'm in a plus size body, 18, size 18, 20, 22, whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter. Large if you're shopping from Universal Standard, God bless them.
Yeah.
And the shame is gone, but there is still this feeling of it isn't gone. I live with it. Am I worthy? Still. I know you liked me when I was thin
Mhm.
and looked a certain way and sat a certain way on your panels and like, but will I still be invited to panels if I'm fat?
Shame is the internalized echo of disgust
Mm,
that comes from the world.
mm,
It's not just like it comes out of nowhere and we just have to release the shame like Oprah says. I mean, that would be nice. I'd love that. But what is happening is we are getting disgusted glances
yes.
from people in our milieu for two things. One is body size, and the other is changes in body size. Weight gain garners this sense of you've let yourself go, blah, 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 you should blah, blah, blah. And we all know how that goes. So I'm not even going to rehearse it because it's so triggering for many people, me included.
Mhm, mhm.
But that shaming gaze that we receive, that disgusted look, is going to have an internal echo of shame for most people who have the ordinary ways of processing emotional information from the environment. So I'm not sure it's possible to completely get beyond that experience of shame so much as to realize where it comes from and view it not as an expression of one's own values, but as an expression of values you don't endorse and that are in a larger context being seen as harmful and toxic, and fat phobia, as I argue in the book, is deeply mired in anti-Black racism, and it's very contingent, it's very recent. It was basically just a very convenient way for white folks to try, based on pseudoscience, to distance white bodies from the Black bodies they were enslaving so brutally, with this theory based on no actual evidence that Black people were fatter.
Mm,
And often this was theorized from the armchair. This was done on the basis of speculation from white men who had never even been to the relevant parts of Africa.
yeah.
And when you think about the whole system, which continues to play such an oppressive role today, it intersects with misogyny powerfully. It makes for sexual fat phobia. It ranks people in this linear way in rough inverse proportion to their body mass, such that you can place almost every individual person on this linear scale and rank them.
Mm,
That is super convenient from the perspective of patriarchy, from the perspective of white supremacy. It is a brilliant way to continue to oppress Black and Brown people today. This has been shown brilliantly not only by Sabrina Strings, who I was invoking in that explanation of the roots of anti fatness and anti Blackness, but also by the scholar Deshaun Harrison, who has shown that continuing to oppress large Black men has played a crucial role in police brutality and even outright state executions, murders by racist white cops of larger Black men like Michael Brown in Ferguson, like Eric Garner in Staten Island.
that's what I thought of immediately.
You look at this horrible mess, and the shame is still there, or at least, on a bad day, it is for me absolutely still there. And it sounds like for you too.
Mhm.
But you can, I think, gain that critical distance. The emotional's still there, but the thought is this is coming from somewhere. It's coming from somewhere terrible. It's coming from somewhere unjust. It's coming from all of these values and systems that are antithetical to what I passionately believe in, like fighting white supremacy and fighting misogyny and fighting transphobia and homophobia and ableism and classism. So I hope that that helps people to actually replace eventually shame with a feeling of anger that they're
Mhm.
being made to feel inadequate in their bodily being just because of who they are. Some of us are just larger than others, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Body diversity is real, bodily changes are real, they're almost inevitable if we get the privilege of aging. And I really wanted to try to contribute to that important counter narrative that just says, the shame is understandable. It's nothing to itself be ashamed of, but it also isn't a reflection of what one should and, in many cases does actually value.
I was thinking as you were talking, just what an intimate experience it is for all of us to be in our bodies, and
Yes.
how a lot of what you just talked about gets us into, right, thinking and systems. And like, it's when you talk about all the systems you just mentioned, I want listeners to sort of understand, like, this is by design.
Absolutely.
You mentioned white men. Okay, like, sort of decided that Black people were dangerous, and, you mentioning, that Black people are gonna be fatter, right? And, like, all these things that we made up, and then there's this real resistance to sort of, like, turning toward the truth, which also shame can't survive.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it's just like there's a part of me that wants to say, as we take in this information, curate your content. There's a lot of great content out there of people who are living in all sizes of bodies that are inclusive and, talking about it. But also, if you have that messaging in your head already, like, I know you didn't ask for it, but it's by design.
Yeah, it's to keep you small and pliant and meek and quiet. Because if you're putting all of your energy into shrinking your body or keeping it a certain size, it will be much harder for you to contribute to political change.
Mm.
And, that was part of what drove me to write this book, this sense that, look, all of this creative energy and bandwidth and money and, yeah, sheer energy and wherewithal, we're spending incalculable amounts of it in service of ideals that are neither useful nor achievable, when think of all the better things we could be turning our attention to.
Mhm.
And I suppose that is the other thing that your points about shame made me think about. I mean, think about like the bodily expressions of shame. So,
Mhm.
head bowed, eyes lowered, kind of severing the sight lines between self and other, trying to avoid that disgusted gaze that is often the cause
Mhm.
of shame, or at least what precipitates it in the immediate moment.
Mhm.
And raising your head and looking at other people like we're doing now, and finding connection with others who are in similar predicaments and who share a similar set of values as to how we should be inclusive and welcoming and embracing of anyone, regardless of their body type, sexuality, size, neurotype, being trans versus cis, their race, their gender expression, whatever it is, finding that solidarity in a kind of genuinely coalition forming way politically, I think can be an amazing antidote to shame, almost just physically. Like, you find a way to connect with others that lifts you out of the isolation that shame engenders entirely by design. I mean, shame is the kind of thing that is meant to isolate someone who deserved a disgusted glance from others, with the idea that they would contaminate them with pathogens or with a disease or something like that.
Mhm.
And so banding together with others who are similarly have been shamed unjustly to fight for a juster world, I think that is a possibility that, again, is an amazing antidote to that shame. Even if it doesn't completely supplant it, it does something with it, it mobilizes it, it does something with that energy.
I know we are mutually affected by Virginia Sewell Smith's writing,
Absolutely.
right? I mean,
Amazing.
I've never talked to her. I haven't talked to her yet. A huge fan. And I appreciate her work talking about people who used to be fat,
Yeah.
which both of us, you and I, we've had different sizes. I've been thin, standard size. I'm sort of curious in your orbit, what your invitation is to people who are living in a standard size body but have been fat before. That feels like another level
Yeah,
of disgust
absolutely.
that emerges. What's that all about?
I mean, I think it's that this sense that they have done better, they know better, they have fixed it, and if you just did A, B, C, X, Y, Z, you could too. So you don't deserve sympathy or support or compassion or even like basic human dignity oftentimes. And it's also this like almost sort of scandalized look at the specter of what their bodies could have been,
Mhm.
that I see. For example, some of the most vicious fat phobia emanate from exactly this place. Like, I'm thinking about the film The Whale,
Oh, yeah.
where both the play and the film was authored by a playwright who used to be fat, but not anywhere nearly as fat as his main character. He has this sort of nightmare vision of the person he could have become, a 600-pound person who is conforming to every stereotype about fat people in the book, binge eating, which I know many people struggle with, but it's something that some thin people struggle with. And it's also something that the prurient depictions of didn't do justice to the fact that binge eating is often rooted in restriction. It's not just like eating way too much, way too fast. It's comes from a more complicated place. But, the sense of him as pitiable because he was disabled, which is just incredibly ableist
Mhm.
and embarrassing, frankly, to have these kinds of depictions of someone in this day and age. Um, but yeah, again, this kind of nightmare vision of the body you could have had really does animate some pretty distressing fat phobia that I think one would hope that formerly fat people were more responsible and responsive to the actual realities of being in a fat body, but often they want to turn away from that and not face it. I get it. I get where it comes from, but it's pretty terrible.
Emily's conversation with Kate Mann will continue after a short break.
Kate wants to spotlight FatCon. This event is centered around the themes of body acceptance and body positivity, while acknowledging that these themes are part of a broader spectrum. The event that happened in Philly in 2023 debuted in Seattle this past January 2024. We can only hope there's more to come.
I've never been to one, so it's just more in the vein of something I would love to do when I get a little less COVID cautious. But it's basically just these conferences that celebrate the fat body, lots of sessions for like inclusive wellness and fitness for fat bodies for everybody. Lots of inclusive fashion, people being able to take in clothing that no longer works for their bodies and swap them. There's lots of discussions of like how to think about fat sexuality in a really positive and liberating way. I've always just thought these are really cool initiatives that do that thing that we talked about, Emily, of helping people lift their heads out of a potentially shame filled stance and like see each other, find community, and like go forward together and change the world.
The events feature keynote speakers, fashion show, vendors, all geared towards generating fat joy and informing the fat experience. Learn more at fatcon.org. Living in the body that I'm in now, loving my life and
Yeah.
happy and sleeping. And I didn't used to be happy. And I know I had insomnia for 3 years, right? I'm still wake up and I'm like, wow, I just got some shorts. It's about that time, right?
Yeah.
And I'm a different size than I was last summer. So I got new shorts because I don't like clothes that are tight. And so sometimes I do, though, because those can be fun too. And I was thinking to myself, like, where I typically go to get my clothes cleaned and my clothes tailored doesn't feel like an inclusive place. I
Mhm.
don't know another way to say that.
Yeah.
Nothing that they're not saying no fat people at the door, but and people know when.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm fat, then I get to decide if this is a fat phobic place, not you,
Yes, totally.
right?
It's what you face, not what they
That's
feel.
right. And so I reached out to someone who had posted in a working women's group that I'm in that I'm an inclusive tailor and seamstress, and I was like, that's what I want. But that's the thought I had is like, this won't be easy for me. I want to wear shorts, which first of all isn't easy,
Yeah,
though it's much easier than it used to be, and I just refuse to be hot and uncomfortable at this stage of my life.
good.
But then it was like, I'm gonna get these shorts tailored, and this woman's gonna have something to say about it. I know she is. Or if she doesn't say anything about it, she's definitely gonna be like, I'm gonna feel it. I'm gonna feel it. I say that to say, I think part of what I would love for everyone to do is to try reading this book. I don't think a lot of people have thought about it. I just don't in my life. And I think, here's what I say. If I were to say to someone, I'm a fat person, they'd be like, Emily, you're not fat. You always look great. And I guess it's for me, even just talking to you feels like really, am I really doing this? Am I really saying like I'm fat? Um, it feels pretty audacious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had that experience when I kind of came out as fat like 3, 4 years ago, for sure.
How do standard size people fit into this conversation, do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I do think that there is this really big problem in building solidarity of this kind, partly because their natural reaction, like, forget the, like, Samuel Hunters of it all, like, forget the really obnoxious, "I'm gonna be horribly fat phobic because I was once somewhat fat, and so I'm gonna imagine a whale." Um, think about the straight-sized person who's, like, trying to be supportive and says things like, "Yeah, you're not fat, you're pretty, you're not fat, you're intelligent, you're competent, you're an amazing mom," or whatever it is. It's like the implication there is so offensive. Imagine, and this is something I take from Aubrey Gordon's recent example, imagine saying to someone, "You're not Canadian, you're great. You're not Canadian, you're intelligent, you're beautiful, you're a great mom." It's like the implication is being a Canadian is terrible
Mhm.
and is antithetical to all of those qualities. So this is something I take not just from Aubrey Gordon's amazing work, but also from Virginia Soul Smith's really brilliant notion of how to have the fat talk with your children
Mm.
is no matter what your size, but maybe especially for people who are straight-sized parents or have straight-sized children, to be able to say, being fat is actually compatible with every wonderful quality that we value in other people,
Mm.
and we don't contrast being fat and smart or sexy or beautiful or cool or caring or competent in what, continue on the list.
Mhm.
We think of these as, again, being fat is just a way to have a body. People's bodies naturally differ. There always have been fat people. There always will be fat people, and every other kind of body diversity, including disability, including being trans, including endless racial and ethnic diversity and different sexualities and ways of expressing that sexuality and gender identity too. Being fat is just a way to be embodied,
Mhm.
and that it's not something to shy away from talking about or thinking about or instantiating. That is really important, and it sort of starts with not having the "you're not fat, you're blah, blah, blah" conversation that is well-meaning, but has really bad implications, actually.
I, in my current relationship, hopefully forever, he's so great. I was a different size when we met. My body was in a different place. I was also mentally in a different place. And I remember someone said to me as I was noticing that I was gaining weight and feeling a lot of fear,
Yeah,
like, oh man, the shame dial turned way up in this particular season.
yeah.
This person said to me, and this person I really looked up to and admired, she said to me, he loves you now and he'll still love you if you're fat. But don't do that to him, you
Whoa.
know. Which right, and this is I say it because it's like I know there's a lot of people that think that. And I want to say that the body we're in, I mean, it's my body. You talk about this a lot in the book, body autonomy. What we do with it and who we let touch it and everything else. But this is not, and Virginia talks about this too, like this is not like for anyone's pleasure. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like, or for anyone's, you said disgust, but for anyone's objectivity. And so I guess, as we think about relationships and especially intimate relationships, um, what I'm thinking about, especially for a teenage girl or a teenager listening, right, and doing all this exploration, you like what you like and what's attractive is attractive. But what do we message to teens about intimacy and different bodies? And I see it all the time where people are panicking because there are kids talking about food and restricting. And like, I
yeah.
hear it in my own house where it's like, that's healthy, that's not.
Healthy as a dog whistle there for likely to make me thinner versus not.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and I mean, again, like, it's a very subtle dog whistle in a way, like, it's obvious to us, but it's ubiquitous, like, it happens in my own family, not in my immediate household, but in my extended family, despite my saying again and again, "Let's not do this, let's not talk about like that." But yeah, here's what I would say. Fat people are found plenty attractive. Like, fat women are one of the most common search terms in pornography. This is not a problem of sexual desire. This is a problem of status, sexual status. And what that person was saying to you was accurately, like, he will still love you and find you attractive regardless of weight. And I would add to that, if he doesn't, then great, you've weeded out someone not worth being with.
Mhm.
I know that's a counterfactual, but just for anyone who is going through that, if someone doesn't like you at a different weight, great, you've gotten rid of someone who's not a suitable partner. I mean, I know it's painful, but it is great to have weeded them out.
Mhm.
But what she was saying was he will, however, lose heteronormative sexual status in having a partner who is less conforming to whatever fat phobic, white ableist beauty ideals are currently in place, which very much includes thinness.
Yeah.
And the troubling part of that is not that there's no truth in that observation. It's that imagine endorsing that system and being like, don't do that to him by existing in the body that you actually have and that is going to body. It's going to change. It's going to evolve. That's what bodies do if we're lucky to have that privilege of aging. But the idea that he was actually entitled to a particular amount of sexual status that you currently conferred on him, and that for most women, as we get older, past the age of 30, it tends to pretty linearly decline, that amount of sexual
Mhm.
status that we lend to a man who we're in relationship with if we're in heterosexual relationships with. The idea of saying the men in this arrangement should actually be given this constant level of sexual status in this entirely bankrupt, toxic system that is harming so many people. It's harming anyone who doesn't conform to these dictates. It's harming everyone who will decrease in sexual value according to its norms. And
Mhm.
like in service of white male entitlement, whatever male entitlement it can be, it's often racialized, but it is not inevitably so. But as I argue in the book, we have a particularly vivid sense that, yeah, white, non disabled, wealthy, thin men, and again, not commenting on your particular partner, I have no idea
Mhm.
who he is or what norms he conforms to, but those are the men who we safeguard their entitlements. We're so jealously
Mhm.
guarding whatever we perceive that they have and guarding them against loss. And that includes loss of the hot woman who has to be thin. Does that make sense? Like, that's
Yeah.
the system,
So
and it's
fucked up.
awful. It's so fucked. So, like, I'm just gonna remember that because don't do that to him. It's just like it's such a good encapsulation of the dynamic that in another context I would call himpathy, this sense that he's entitled to all of this sympathy and attention and safeguarding of his reputation and his golden boy status and all of the above, rather
Mhm.
than recognizing if someone has done something that is actually bad and misogynistic, we feel sorry for him losing reputation rather than bad for his victim, in this way that again plays this particular functional role of safeguarding his privileges, his perceived entitlements, his property rights to people's bodies.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. How about it?
Awful.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I want to leave with I have I have two more thoughts. One is I would just love for everyone to consider not commenting on what people look like or what they're eating.
100%.
Um
Ever.
like ever. Like if you just walk away from this podcast with one invitation, that's it.
Yeah.
I know you're going to think things. I'm going to really challenge you to like just stop there and not go to action.
That's your inside thought. That's for inside your head. And yeah, you can just not talk about it at all. At all.
That's an option, and we'd love it. Collectively, I think as a species,
Yeah.
I want to talk about how you feel in your body today. Just like what is it like to be Kate today?
I mean, I talk about this in the book, like I'm
Your hair looks great. How do you feel about your hair?
I got my hair done for a photo shoot about a week ago, exactly a week ago, and I feel great about it. Thank you.
Good. Okay, that's all I'm going to ask about your appearance. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's kind of long these days, which I'm enjoying. I always feel like as I get older, I should shorten my hair, and then I do, and then I'm like, oh, I don't feel like myself as much. So, but that's the thing. Body positivity for me has never worked great. I love it for anyone for whom it works well, but for me, it always feels a bit toxic and a bit like oppressive almost. You have to be positive. You have to feel great about yourself. And um, I also find body neutrality by the same token a bit wan, a bit lackluster. So the option that I like really is instead of thinking about neutrality or positivity, which really are only on the table because the prospect of negativity is so salient, the thought that I had in writing this book was why not throw out the scales, the rankings, the implicit quantification of all of this? Why not throw all of that out the window? And the mantra that became important to me was my body is for me, your body is for you, and so on and so forth for everyone in the world. And so, this idea is that the body is just not there for comparison or correction or consumption on the part of other people. It's not there to confer on another person, such as a sexual partner status. It's not there for the judgment of a parent. It's not there for the approval or disapproval of someone catcalling or fat shaming on the street. Your body is for you, and your own perspective on your body is the only one that matters. And for me, when I take that perspective up, a lot of my self criticisms and judgments and feelings just fall away. I had the experience just today of going to my doctor and him talking about how I have been much heavier than I currently am, and I must feel so much better now in my body. And I was pleased with myself that I'm bad at standing up to doctors even to this day because I'm reliant on them for care. And even as someone who at this point considers myself healthy and is non-disabled and doesn't require a whole lot of care, I just feel that vulnerability very intensely at the doctors. And so I don't tend to read them the riot act or talk about fat phobia. I find that really hard to do still. It's something I'm working on. But I said to him, you know what? I actually don't feel different in my body. I felt great at a much higher weight, and I still feel good. I don't think I feel quite as good because I think I lost the weight in a way that was pretty unhealthy and was hard on my body and my metabolism, but I feel pretty good now. And it is easier to navigate a fat phobic world in this body, but that's kind of it. I felt pretty good 60 pounds ago.
Yeah.
And he was like, huh, and just moved on. But I hope that planted a small seed. If my body is for me, and for many of us, when we think not of ourselves as objects, but as subjects, we either feel pretty good actually about our bodies, or we then can focus on the things that actually matter, like I would love to be free of this pain in my shoulder, or how can I work on this with a size inclusive physical therapist? So, yeah, I would say that the mantra, my body is for me, has really helped me have a perspective on my body that feels pretty freeing, ironically, pretty positive. But because it's not relentlessly positive, it also gives me some sense of liberty within that to have moments of shame, moments where I've internalized messages I don't endorse, but I can distance myself from those thought processes.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I feel so much love right now. I just feel so like there's nothing that needs editing or changing in anyone.
Yeah,
I mean, it
exactly.
just is happening.
Exactly.
And the last thought that I want to share is like one thing that I believe is you can't hate yourself into a version of yourself you love.
Yeah, that's completely true.
So, and you I'm going to come back to this over and over again, Kate, about just the energy, the exhaustion of trying, right? All these ways that are blunt instruments to get to somewhere.
Yeah.
And the softening of all of that, fat people get to feel soft all the time in some ways. But like I mean, that's the part of my body that I sort of love is my soft.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm touching
same.
like my legs right now, my belly, and it's like, I love this body. So you, I will say, have helped me immensely with just talking about it so openly and not being worried about what other people think or as much or being prepared for the oversimplification of looking at me and what it must mean if I've gained weight and that it must mean I need help and it must mean like I'm in a tough spot and it must mean all these things. And I just want to say, like, truthfully, and I could cry about this too, I'm the happiest I've ever been and I'm in this body.
That's so great. Yeah.
So the data is it just doesn't match, but it's
No,
wild.
it that's completely right. Yeah, I mean, people have different feelings about Mary Oliver. I really like
Yeah,
her,
I
and
do too.
the idea that, resonated with me that everyone quotes, but it's just so good that I have to say it, the idea of letting your soft animal of a body love what it loves, and that was, like, one of the thoughts that kept me from weight loss surgery is my body is a soft and comfortable place to be. And yeah, I think embracing that softness, that lushness, that irrepressible flesh that
Mm,
just doesn't need to be seen as something to excise. You know, I've been reading Kat Bohannon's wonderful book Eve that talks about fat is an organ, especially for women. It's kind of an extension of the liver. It like does all this amazing stuff in terms of like, you know, filtering out toxins and blah blah blah. It's like I can't follow the science of it exactly, but it's the idea that fat can just be like leached off your body and the more the better. That is an ideology. It's not a fact. And yeah, loving your softness, embracing your softness, and seeing your fat as actually doing cool things in the world, including alienating small, bitter men, as Lindy West put it, who are who are so deflated by women's fat bodies. That's another
God.
useful purpose, like fat as a social organ, like in social communication. There's something to that too.
How are you feeling toward your book? Like when you see it and when you talk about it?
I mean, I'm so proud of it. I'm so proud of her.
Yeah, yeah,
It was a tough moment to bring out this book because, everyone is sort of in the media on the Ozempic bandwagon, and there is this sense like, "Oh, this conversation is over. Fatness, we've solved it." So it was a difficult room to publish this book into.
yeah.
No one wanted what I was selling, everyone wanted Ozempic. But
Mhm.
that being said, I think there's a role for it now more than ever, it's just more of a niche role. It's kind of a book for the people who are, you know, maybe going down this road and really ambivalent, maybe refusing to go down the road and being pressured to. I've
Mm,
heard from a lot of people who have said, look, I'm actually really comfortable and happy in my body, but I keep hearing from friends and relatives and doctors I should try these weight loss drugs.
yeah.
And your book helped me maintain my own sense of what my body needed. And that
Mm,
has been a real privilege.
thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh.
Amazing. Such a great conversation, Emily. I'm so grateful for it.
Thank you to author, philosopher, guiding light, and new friend, Kate Mann, for joining me for this episode. Links to Kate's wisdom, work, books, and recommendations are in our show notes and at who'smissingpodcast.com. Are you thinking of someone, I know I am, who could really use this conversation? Probably someone I talked to today or like 5 minutes ago. Follow that instinct and share it with them now. Copy the link, send it in a text, put it in the group chat, and say, you got to listen to this and then we got to talk about it. Thanks for listening.
Tell me